Elizabeth Cochran was born in Cochrane Mills, Pennsylvania on May 5, 1864. Her family lived a pretty comfortable life until tragically, when Elizabeth was just 6 years old, her father, Michael Cochran, passed away. Without his income as a lawyer, Cochran's family was unable to afford the expenses of maintaining the homestead, so they were forced to move to a more modest home. The Cochrans ended up moving to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where Elizabeth had to help her mother raise her siblings, so she did not have a lot of time for school. Still, her ultimate goal was to become a teacher, so in 1879, Elizabeth Cochran decided to go to college at Indiana Teachers College. But due to her family's financial situation, Elizabeth has to drop out just after one semester of college. So Elizabeth began helping her mother at the boarding house where she worked. One day, while she was working at the boarding house, Cochran read an article from the Pittsburgh Dispatch that had a very negative representation of women. She thought the article was very sexist, so Cochran decides to write a letter to the editor denouncing the article. Cochran was astonished when the editor, obviously impressed with her response, offers her a job as a columnist at the Pittsburgh Dispatch. On January 3, 1885, Cochran accepts the job and starts working at the Pittsburgh Dispatch. When she starts writing for the Dispatch, she takes the pen name Nellie Bly. Over the course of her career as a columnist, Nellie ends up writing many riveting and interesting articles for the Dispatch. Almost exclusively, the articles were addressed only to women's issues, but Nellie wanted to write pieces that addressed issues which would be more relevant and of interest to both men and women. So in 1886, she leaves the Pittsburgh Dispatch and decides to move to New York to find a job that give her more flexibility in what she could write. In 1887, Bly found a job at the New York World newspaper. At the New York World, Bly's career skyrockets. One of her first projects is one of her most well-known pieces of work. Bly hears about the treatment of people in the insane asylums are very poor, and she wants to fix it. So Bly pretends to be insane and gets admitted into an insane asylum on Blackwell's Island in New York. While she is there, she sees firsthand the poor and disgusting treatment of many patients. When she leaves, she wrote a book called 10 Days in the Madhouse, where she exposes the poor conditions in the asylum and the neglect work performed by many of the workers in the insane asylum. Her book has major effects on insane asylums nationwide. Her groundbreaking work was the reason why there are many reforms made to the insane asylum system, made them better places for the patients to live and receive care and treatment. After working on conditions of the insane asylums, she did more undercover work at jails and factories in New York, and helping reform those systems as well and making people's lives better. After all her investigative work, Bly's already successful career probably hit its peak in 1889. When Bly reads Jules Verne's book Around the World in 80 Days, in which Verne's character Phileas Fogg is able to travel the world in just 80 days. When Bly reads this, she's inspired to beat this record. And on November 14, 1889, Bly sets off to beat Fogg's record. Bly traveled in various ways to beat this record. She traveled by train, steamship, rickshaw, horse, and donkey. She made it to London in just 7 days and was able to meet Jules Verne, the man who wrote Around the World in 80 Days. As she is leaving London, Cosmopolitan sends Elizabeth Bislin, a journalist of their own, to try to beat Nellie Bly. Meanwhile, during Bly's journey, she was able to send brief dispatches about her journey from the New York World to publish. Back in the United States, there was a lot of excitement surrounding Bly's journey. People were taking bets on the exact minute Bly would return home. There were even a board game created about Bly's travels. But when Bly reaches Japan, she finds out about Elizabeth Bislin and her travels. Bly was shocked about the fact that someone was racing against her, but even more surprised that Bislin was ahead of her. True to her indomitable spirit, Bly was surprised by the challenge but kept pushing through. After a long journey across the Pacific to San Francisco, Bly was greeted with celebration because of her accomplishments. Once she got to the mainland, the New York World had chartered a train waiting to bring Bly back to New York as fast as possible. On January 25, 1890, Bly was greeted at a New Jersey train station by a large crowd. Bly had made Around the World in just 72 days, shattering Phileas Fogg's record. As for Elizabeth Bislin, she missed a boat in England and ended up completing her journey 4 days after Nellie Bly. After Bly's travels around the world, she decided to take a break from her journalism and focus on her personal life. On January 1, 1895, Bly marries millionaire Robert Seaman. Then Bly becomes president of her husband's ironclad company, and when he dies in 1904, she takes full reign of the company and was even the inventor of a novel milk can and a stacking garbage can, for which she holds the patents for both. After the Ironclad goes out of business, Bly decides to go back to reporting. Some of her big works include going to Europe to report on the beginning of World War I, and also reporting in the Women's Suffrage Parade in 1913, where she's able to interview Susan B. Anthony. Sadly, on January 27, 1922, Nellie Bly dies of pneumonia at the age of 57. Though Bly died, she left an everlasting impact on the world. Bly was one of the first investigative reporters. Her investigative work brought many good to people in insane asylums, jails, and factories. She was able to defy all odds and travel the world in just 72 days. She was a trailblazer for all women journalists to come, and her impact on these and many other areas will live forever beyond her all too short life.